My name is Morgan Evans, and I just turned 27 years old today. What should have been a happy celebration at an upscale Philadelphia bistro quickly turned into the most shocking moment of my life. While my parents nervously watched my billionaire grandfather, Charles Anderson, who rarely shows up at family gatherings, smiled warmly and asked, "Is the condo comfortable?" When I replied, "What condo?" my parents literally froze in their seats. The look on Grandpa's face changed instantly as he turned to them and asked in an eerily calm voice, "Then where did the money go?" If you're watching this from somewhere around the world, make sure to hit like and subscribe to hear about the family betrayal that completely changed my life and taught me who I could really trust. Before everything fell apart that night, I was living what I thought was a normal life. I worked as a UX designer at a small agency in Center City, Philadelphia, making just enough to cover my bills and occasionally treat myself to a nice coffee. My condo was nothing special, a two-bedroom in a slightly run-down building that I shared with my roommate Olivia. The rent was steep, even split between us, but that was city living for you. Our place had character, though, with mismatched furniture we had collected over the years and walls covered in art prints and photographs. Despite having a billionaire grandfather, I was proud of making my own way. My parents, Harold and Diane, lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life in the suburbs. They had a 5-bedroom house with a pool and took lavish vacations twice a year. I always assumed they were doing well because my dad had a senior position at an insurance company and my mom worked in real estate. They never offered financial help, always emphasizing the importance of working for what you want. When I graduated from art school 4 years ago with nearly $70,000 in student loans, they congratulated me on taking my first steps into adulthood. While other parents helped with down payments or covered a few months of rent to help their kids get started, mine handed me a copy of Dave Ramsey and told me building character through struggle was important. I never resented them for it. Not really. I was determined to prove I could make it on my own. But there were times when things got really tight that I wondered why they seemed so reluctant to help, especially when they would show up in a new luxury car or talk about the kitchen remodel they were planning. Grandpa Charles Anderson was an enigma to me. He had built his fortune in real estate development, starting with nothing and eventually creating one of the largest property companies in the Midwest. He was stern, intimidating, and rarely attended family functions. When he did show up, everyone walked on eggshells around him. But despite his gruff exterior, he always had a soft spot for me. On the rare occasions we spoke, he would ask thoughtful questions about my design work and actually listen to my answers. My cousin Natalie was the only one in our generation who seemed to have benefited from the family wealth. She had a trust fund that gave her a very comfortable lifestyle. She never worked a day in her life, but constantly posted photos from exotic locations and high-end restaurants on social media. Whenever we were at family gatherings together, she would talk about her latest shopping spree or vacation in a way that felt deliberately designed to highlight the differences in our situations. The week before my birthday had been particularly rough. The design agency I worked for lost a major client, and I was among the 5 employees who got laid off. With just enough savings to cover maybe 2 months of expenses, I was panicking about how I would make rent while searching for a new job in a competitive field. When my parents called to insist on taking me out for a fancy birthday dinner, I tried to decline. I suggested we do something simple instead. The champagne flute felt cold in my hand. I was about to toast my future, my new job, my fresh start. My parents' proud smiles beamed back at me. This was it. The long struggle was finally over. Then, a news alert flashed on the muted TV screen behind the bar. Massive international fraud ring busted, tied to local investors. My mother's smile vanished. My father's glass hit the table, champagne splashing onto the white linen. Their panicked eyes met. They weren't celebrating my future. They were fleeing theirs. But from what? Suddenly, every odd moment came rushing back. The hushed phone calls, my dad's strange comments about not seeing each other as often, my mom quickly closing her laptop, looking at properties in Panama. The strange tension whenever Grandpa Charles was mentioned. My entire life, a carefully constructed lie. The air in the upscale bistro grew heavy. The clinking of silverware sounded like accusations. My mother reached for my hand, her own trembling. "Morgan, honey, there's something we need to explain." Her voice was a fragile, broken thing. The scent of rain on pavement seeped in from the city street, a cold promise of the storm to come. Everything was about to change. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling and the tables were dressed in crisp white linens. The hostess led us to a table in the center of the dining room where my parents had already arranged for a bottle of champagne to be waiting on ice. I felt immediately out of place in my simple black dress and the same heels I had worn to job interviews for the past 3 years. My mother was draped in a designer outfit I had never seen before with a necklace that probably cost more than my rent. My father wore an expensive-looking suit with gold cufflinks that caught the light when he reached for his water glass. The conversation felt forced from the beginning. They asked surface-level questions about my job search, but changed the subject whenever I expressed any real concern. Instead, they kept steering the conversation toward safe topics like a movie they had recently seen, or updates about distant relatives I barely knew. After we ordered, they presented me with their gifts, a designer wallet and a scarf that, while beautiful, seemed strangely modest considering the bistro they had chosen. As I thanked them, my mother launched into a familiar lecture about financial responsibility and the importance of building good credit. I was halfway through my entree, nodding along to another of my father's stories about his college days when the atmosphere in the bistro suddenly shifted. People at nearby tables straightened in their seats and the staff became noticeably more attentive. I turned to see what had caused the change and spotted him immediately. Grandpa Charles Anderson had arrived, accompanied by his assistant, Jennifer, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, who was rarely more than a few steps away from him. At 82, Charles Anderson still cut an imposing figure. Tall and straight-backed with a full head of silver hair. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary, and his presence commanded attention without him having to say a word. The air in the bistro grew still. Crystal clinked softly against the sudden silence. My parents froze mid-sentence. Their faces paled. My father shot up, nearly spilling his water. "Charles, this is unexpected. We weren't sure you'd make it for Morgan's birthday." My grandfather's gaze swept past him. It landed on me. The stern lines of his face softened. He leaned in. The scent of fine leather and cedar filled the space. "Happy birthday, Morgan," he said, his voice a low rumble. He kissed my cheek. 27 years. Your performance this quarter has been exceptional." I blinked. "My performance?" "Of course," Charles said, taking the seat beside me. Jennifer stood poised, her tablet a silent witness. The expansion into the Asian markets was a masterstroke. Brilliant risk assessment. My parents looked ill. My mother's grip on her fork was deadly. "Grandpa," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm a UX designer. I don't—" "What Asian markets?" Charles's eyes, sharp and calculating, finally flickered. He turned his icy focus to my parents. The room held its breath. "Then who?" he asked, each word a shard of glass. "Exactly have I been receiving quarterly reports from for the past 2 years?" The expensive champagne suddenly tasted like betrayal. My parents had been stealing my success. They had built their luxury on my mind, my work. They hid the empire I built from the ground up. Charles Anderson saw the truth in my stunned silence. He saw their guilt. The family protector had arrived, but he wasn't here for a birthday. He was here for an audit, and his favorite granddaughter was the asset they had mismanaged. "Jennifer," he said without looking away from them. The word was quiet, final. "Get me the real books. Now. We are done with the fiction." The gentle rain scent from outside did nothing to clear the stifling tension. The truth was out, and it was time for a reckoning. The gentle rustle of leaves outside was the only sound in the tense quiet. Then my grandfather, Charles Anderson, broke it. The $5 million. The trust fund you never knew about. He mentioned the luxury condo in Center City with its stunning lake views. His voice was still pleasant, but his eyes, they were fixed on my parents. "Is it comfortable?" he asked. "I chose that building for its security." My own voice was a strained whisper. What condo? The silence that fell was heavier than any noise. My father went pale. My mother looked ill. Charles's demeanor shifted. The calm shattered, replaced by a terrifying stillness, the kind you feel before a storm. "You don't know about the condo." It was a cold, hard fact. The corner unit in the lakeside tower, purchased for your 25th birthday. I could only shake my head, my world tilting. All those little luxuries they'd enjoyed, the new car, the renovations, had it all been built on a lie? He turned to my parents with a slow, deliberate motion. His voice dropped, becoming quiet. A cold blade. "Then where did the money go?" "Charles, there's been a misunderstanding," my father stammered. "We can explain everything." "I sincerely hope so," my grandfather replied. The tone made it clear no explanation would ever be enough. He turned. "Jennifer, call Stanley. Have him come now." "Already done, sir," she said. "He's nearby. Security is pulling all the financial records." The other diners in the bistro were staring openly now, their expensive meals forgotten. A waiter hovered, unsure. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled away. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. "Morgan, sweetheart," she pleaded. "This isn't how we wanted to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising. Charles's pleasant demeanor shattered as he leaned in. The scent of his expensive cologne became cloying. "The money," he said, his voice a cold blade. "It was never for you. It was the payout to keep your parents quiet about the accident, the one you caused." The truth hits you, not as a memory, but as a wave of long-buried guilt and horror, the scent of antiseptic and wilting roses, the low, constant beep of a heart monitor. My grandmother's papery hand squeezed mine. "It's all for you, my darling girl, for your future." Hours before the silence fell, she gave me a sealed envelope, a secret I was too young to understand, now screaming from a forgotten vault. "You have a trust fund, Morgan, and a condo, and you never knew." My father glanced nervously at the other diners. "This isn't the place." "I agree," Charles Anderson said coldly. "Jennifer, a private room." His expression softened as he turned to me. "Morgan, you will get answers tonight. All of them." As Jennifer spoke to the manager, I sat in stunned silence. All those years of financial struggle, my student loans, their gift of a used car, why would they hide this? What did they do with a future meant for me? How do you ever trust someone again? The private room had dark wood and a long table. Our small group looked so isolated. Charles sat at the head. I was to his right. My parents sat across from me. They looked ill. Jennifer stood near the door, her tablet ready. The attorney, Stanley Thornton, arrived, a balding man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He placed his leather briefcase on the table. "I brought the original trust documents, sir, and the most recent financials." "Good," Charles said. "Start at the beginning. For Morgan." Stanley cleared his throat. "Morgan, when you were born, your grandfather established a trust, $5 million. Your parents were the trustees until your 25th birthday. Then, full control would transfer to you." The faint scent of rain on old paper, it filled the attic air. Each thing I uncovered, a puzzle piece, a worn teddy bear, my report card, sunlit afternoons flashed in my mind, my mother's warm embrace, the taste of birthday cake. Then, I found it, a sealed letter. This trust was not just money. It was a map of dreams dreams I never knew were mine. You have a trust fund, Morgan, and you never knew. I stared at the attorney in that quiet room. My world had turned upside down. Your parents were to tell you at 18, Stanley said. He glanced at them. I see they did not. My father's voice was tight. Nor did the asset transfer happen. He turned to the lawyer. What is the current value? Stanley placed a paper on the dark wood table. Approximately $8.3 million. The number hung in the air. $8.3 million. I thought of my student loans, skipping meals to pay rent. All that time, it was just gone. I want proof of every withdrawal, Charles Anderson said. His voice was dangerously calm. My father finally broke. Charles Anderson. We can explain. Some investments underperformed. The money is just allocated elsewhere. Where, exactly? Charles asked. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Harold, tell the truth. She looked at Charles. After the recession, we had difficulties. We made adjustments. By stealing from your daughter? Charles' words were ice. It wasn't stealing, my father insisted. We're her parents. We were protecting her. I found my voice then. It was barely a whisper. Protecting me from what? By letting me struggle with student loans in a tiny condo with a roommate while you lived in a 5-bedroom house with a pool. By watching me stress about making rent while you bought new cars and went on luxury vacations. How exactly was that in my best interest? Jennifer quietly placed a glass of water in front of me. I hadn't realized I was shaking until I tried to pick it up and nearly spilled it. Stanley had been examining the financial records with a growing frown. There appeared to be numerous unauthorized withdrawals beginning approximately 7 years ago. Large sums transferred to personal accounts belonging to Harold and Diane. He looked up, his expression grim. Based on my preliminary review, it appears that all but approximately $300,000 has been diverted from the trust. The room went silent. $8 million reduced to $300,000. I felt physically ill. Where's the money now? Charles Anderson asked, his calm voice belying the fury evident in his eyes. My father looked down at his hands. Some of it went to pay off our mortgage, some for cars, renovations to the house, investments in Diane's real estate business, vacations, my mother added quietly. The house in Florida. Memories flashed through my mind, painful in their new context. My parents declining to help with my security deposit on my first condo after college, telling me that my student loan burden was good character building when I expressed anxiety about the payments. My mother showing off her new Mercedes while I took the bus to work because I couldn't afford car payments, all while they had access to millions of dollars that was meant for me. You let me struggle, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. All those years, all those sleepless nights worrying about money. You watched me work 2 jobs during college. You saw how stressed I was about being laid off last week. My voice grew stronger with my anger. And you had my money the whole time. The air in the lavish bistro thickens with unspoken tension. Morgan Evans locks eyes with her parents, the desperation and guilt weaving desperately between them. Her heart pounds, a painful reminder of betrayal. How did it come to this? Just moments ago, family dinners were filled with laughter, yet now the future of their family hangs on her next word. A colossal question looms. What can she possibly say to heal the deep wounds of betrayal? Protecting me from what? She had whispered, a tremor in her voice. The financial records lay before them like a damning truth. Large sums, nearly $8 million, disappeared into her parents' personal accounts, money that was meant for her future. $300,000 is all that's left. Charles Anderson's voice cut through the silence, steady yet filled with disbelief. Morgan could feel the bile rising. How could they have betrayed her like this? Her mother wept. We always intended to pay it back. Things just got out of hand. Out of hand? Morgan felt a rage simmering just beneath the surface. You let me struggle, she shot back. Years of working 2 jobs, sleepless nights filled with anxiety, while they enjoyed luxury vacations and drove new cars, all funded by her trust. Tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Charles Anderson turned coolly to her. "This is your decision. Press charges or not." The enormity of it all washed over her. "I need time to think." The words felt like lead on her tongue. But how could she process this fracture in her world? The stakes grew higher. Charles Anderson instructed, "Freeze their assets. No moving without my approval." The finality of it sent a shiver down Morgan's spine. Could she really do this? As her parents sat in silence, regret painted on their faces, she pondered. Could trust ever be rebuilt? The thought echoed in her mind. Would they pay back their debt in more than money, or would this mark the end of their family ties forever? The bistro manager knocked softly on the door. He poked his head in. "Is everything all right?" The tension in the room was a physical weight. It had its own gravity. "Just the check," Charles Anderson said. His voice was a cold, final thing. "We're finished here." As the manager retreated, I looked at these people. My family. How had I never seen the truth before? My parents stared at the table. They couldn't meet my eyes. My grandfather sat beside me, steady, unshakable. Jennifer and Stanley were all business, professional in the face of our family's implosion. Nothing would ever be the same. The very foundation of my life was a lie. What would be left when the dust settled? The car ride home was silent, suffocating. I declined Charles's offer to stay at one of his properties. I needed my own shabby condo, a familiar space. As the taxi pulled away, I watched them. My parents stood frozen on the sidewalk. The harsh city light made them look small, old, defeated. I walked through my door. Olivia took one look at my face. She knew. Something was terribly wrong. She guided me to the couch. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. She waited, patient. I struggled to find the words. "My parents stole $8 million from me." The sentence sounded absurd. It hung in the air between us. Then the whole story spilled out, in broken, disjointed pieces. The trust fund I never knew about. The condo that should have been mine. The years of struggle. All for nothing. The shock began to fade. A new feeling took its place, a deep, bone-chilling anger. I applied for food stamps last year. My voice broke on the memory, the shame of it. I was eating ramen 4 nights a week, just to save money. I looked at my best friend, my truth finally spoken, and they were using my money to remodel their kitchen, to buy luxury cars. Olivia held my hand tightly as I cycled through shock, rage, and grief. At some point, she made tea that grew cold on the coffee table. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from my parents, which I ignored. The only message I responded to was from Charles Anderson confirming that I was safe and asking if I needed anything. The next morning, Jennifer called with updates. Charles Anderson's legal team was moving quickly. They had already confirmed that the house in Florida, my parents' primary residence, and both their vehicles had been purchased using money from my trust. A forensic accountant was tracking down every withdrawal and transfer. The preliminary findings indicate that approximately $300,000 remains of the original trust, Jennifer explained in her efficient way. Most of the money went to real estate purchases, luxury items, and some high-risk investments that performed poorly. The days that followed passed in a blur. I took sick leave from my new job search, unable to focus on anything beyond the immediate crisis. Charles Anderson sent a car each day to bring me to meetings with attorneys, financial advisors, and eventually a therapist specializing in family trauma. A week after my birthday, we learned that my parents had purchased plane tickets to Panama 3 days before my birthday dinner. They had been planning to leave the country immediately after the celebration, apparently having realized that Charles Anderson might discover their deception at any moment. The only reason they hadn't fled already was that they needed to maintain appearances until after my birthday, which they knew Charles Anderson might attend. The extended family fractured along predictable lines. My father's siblings defended him, suggesting that Charles Anderson was overreacting to what was just poor financial management. My mother's side was more divided, with her sister calling me directly to apologize for what her sister had done. The most surprising ally came in the form of my cousin Natalie. The scent of rain through my open window did little to clear the air. My condo felt heavy with a truth I was still learning to breathe. Then, an unexpected visitor. My cousin Natalie stood at my door, her usual bright energy gone. She sat on my worn couch, her eyes avoiding mine. "I always wondered," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "why your parents lived so large. My trust was smaller, but managed right. I had to be careful with every dollar." She gave a sad laugh. "My Instagram life was all a show. I was actually jealous of you. I thought you had it all. The loving family, the real wealth. I never imagined they were stealing from you." Her confession hung in the quiet room. It was the first genuine connection I'd felt in weeks. A single point of light in the overwhelming dark, but the wheels of justice kept turning. Charles Anderson's team was merciless. They tracked every dollar. The Florida house, their main home, the cars, all bought with my future. All now seized. The final number was a brutal fact. Only $300,000 left of my inheritance. The rest, spent or lost. Their calls and emails became more desperate. My father's voice from a cheap hotel. My mother's long letters about how it was all for me. How does a boat benefit a child? How does a diamond necklace secure a future? They never could say. Then the news vans arrived. The story was no longer just mine. It was about to become everyone's. The constant rain against my window mirrored the storm in my mind. For 3 weeks, I'd lived in a fog of legal meetings and quiet shame. My Philadelphia condo felt like a cage. I'd deleted my entire online life, unable to face the whispers. The guilt was a physical ache. Had my own needs driven my parents to this? Was I wrong to let Charles Anderson's lawyers destroy them? Then, an invitation. As I sat across from Charles in his surprisingly cozy penthouse, the rich aroma of Italian food filled the air. It almost masked the tension. He fixed the drinks himself. His staff sent home. "I want you to know," he said, his voice low, "none of this is your fault." He looked older than his photos. Weary. "They betrayed you. They betrayed the trust I placed in them. I keep thinking I should have known." I admitted there were small signs I'd missed, things that made sense only now. "You had no reason to suspect your own parents," Charles replied, his tone firm, "especially when you didn't even know the money existed." He sounded so certain. For a moment, I almost believed him. I began to relax, just a little. His phone chimed, a soft, polite sound. He glanced at the screen. His entire demeanor changed. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by ice. He slowly turned the phone toward me. My own face stared back from the screen. But it wasn't a recent photo. It was a security still, grainy, from the lobby of his corporate headquarters, dated over a month ago. The room went silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. The scent of garlic and herbs now seemed sickly sweet. "This was taken the day before I first contacted you," Charles said. His voice was dangerously calm, a complete transformation from the empathetic uncle of moments before. "You came to see me, but you never came up. My security log shows you turned and left after 5 minutes. Why?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I could only stare. "Your parents' recklessness was one thing," he continued, placing the phone down. His gaze locked onto mine. "A predictable greed. But this is a different kind of game. Who told you to come? What were you really doing there?" The cozy penthouse now felt like an interrogation room. The man across from me wasn't a grieving uncle. He was a predator who had just found a new piece of the puzzle. And that piece was me. I wasn't just a victim. I was a pawn. And the board was much, much larger than I ever imagined. Perhaps if I had been a different daughter, your mother might have valued money differently. It was the rawest honesty I had ever seen from my grandfather. It cut deep. The betrayal wasn't just about me. They had stolen from their own father, the man who only wanted to protect me. 1 month later, I faced them. The legal mediation was in a sleek Philadelphia high-rise. The space was cold, all polished steel and glass. My parents looked so small there. They had aged a decade in a month. My father's face was gaunt. My mother's hands would not stop shaking. Their clothes were different, simpler. I later learned they'd sold their entire designer wardrobe. The conference room was immense. Charles sat beside me, a wall of lawyers behind him. My parents had one attorney. He looked nervous. He shuffled his papers nonstop. The financial team began. They spoke with cold, clinical precision. Charts glowed on screens. They mapped 7 years of theft. It started with small loans. It became a flood. The money bought their house, their cars, lavish vacations, my mother's failed real estate agency, my father's disastrous day trading. With every new fact, my father stiffened. My mother just stared at the table. She wiped away silent tears. Finally, Charles spoke. His voice was flat, hard. The forensic accounting is complete. We know where every single dollar went. The mediator entered. His face was unreadable. He placed a single folder on the polished table. "We've reviewed the financials," he stated. His voice echoed in the tense silence. "The numbers don't add up. There's another account." My parents exchanged a panicked glance. My father's jaw tightened. Just how deep does this betrayal go? The mediator's words hung in the sterile air. Civil or criminal? My parents' lawyer stammered, "My clients wish to make amends." Amends? The word tasted like ash. You stole my future. You watched me struggle, while you lived like kings on my money. How do you make amends for that? My father stared at the table. Morgan Evans. It started small, a loan to get through a rough patch. Then it just got easier, my mother whispered. We told ourselves we deserved it, for all our sacrifices as parents. The condo, I asked, my voice like ice. The one Grandpa bought for me. What was your plan there? A heavy silence. Then my father sighed. We were renting it out. The income went to us. The truth was a physical blow. While I shared a cramped rental, they were landlords to my own home. Charles Anderson's hand settled on my shoulder, a steady anchor. His voice was low and final. Your options are clear. Option 1. You sign over every asset bought with that money. You cooperate fully and agree to a repayment plan. In exchange, Morgan agrees not to press criminal charges. They nodded, desperate. Option 2. Charles Anderson's voice hardened to steel. You obstruct. You defend this, and we proceed with criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The evidence is irrefutable. You will both face significant prison time. We choose option 1, my father said quickly. We'll cooperate completely. Charles Anderson looked to me. Morgan Evans, the decision is yours. I studied my parents. These people who had raised me, who had tucked me in at night and cheered at my graduations. These same people who had systematically stolen my inheritance while watching me struggle. The conflicting emotions were overwhelming. I don't want them in prison, I finally said, but I want every penny recovered that can be recovered. And I want them to acknowledge exactly what they did, not just to me, but to the entire family. The legal details were worked out over the next several hours. My parents signed document after document transferring assets and agreeing to the terms Charles Anderson's team had outlined. By the end of the day, I legally owned their house in Florida, which would be sold, and arrangements were made to recover as many of their possessions as possible for liquidation. When the attorneys stepped out to make copies, I found myself alone with my parents for the first time since my birthday. "Why?" I asked simply. "I want to understand how you could do this." My mother reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. "We got caught up in a lifestyle we couldn't really afford. Your father made some bad investments early in our marriage, and we were always trying to catch up to keep appearances. When we had access to your trust, it seemed like an easy solution, just a little to help us get ahead. But it never stopped." "We have a problem with money," my father admitted, looking truly ashamed for the first time. "With spending, with status. We need help. Professional help. That doesn't excuse what we did to you, but maybe it helps explain it. It wasn't enough. No explanation could ever be enough. But it was a start. A tiny crack in the wall of betrayal that stood between us." 2 weeks later, I moved into a modest one-bedroom condo purchased with part of the recovered funds. The camera pushes in on the financial statement on my tablet. The final reconciliation. The recovered sum. Just over $1 million. It wasn't from the Florida house sale, not from my parents' auctioned possessions. It was a transfer from an offshore account. The account's owner, Charles Anderson. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a recovery. It was a payoff. A silent agreement I never made. My parents' conviction. It didn't just clear my name. It buried something else. Something darker. Charles's careful guidance. His insistence on security. His lessons in trust. It wasn't mentorship. It was guilt. The real culprits paid him. To buy my silence. To buy his freedom. And he used my own stolen inheritance to do it. I sat in my silent condo. The hum of the city felt like a lie. The scent of rain on the pavement, a memory of our last dinner. He looked me in the eye and told me to be careful with the money. The ultimate betrayal is not from the enemy you see, but from the protector you trust. I stared at the screen. The numbers blurred. That money was tainted. A life-changing sum built on a life-shattering lie. Every lesson he taught me. Every piece of advice. Was it all a performance? A carefully constructed act to keep me complacent? To keep me from looking deeper? The man I had begun to see as a father figure was just a richer, more sophisticated thief. He didn't recover my future. He purchased his own. The trust was gone. But now, so was he. Most unexpected was the reemergence of Thomas, a friend from college I had lost touch with. He reached out after seeing me at a coffee shop near my new condo, and our reconnection felt like finding an anchor in stormy seas. He had no connection to my family drama, no preconceived notions about who I should be. With him, I could just be Morgan Evans, not the victim of a high-profile family betrayal. As summer faded into fall, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not just for financial stability, but for rebuilding a life that was authentically mine, founded on truth rather than deception. 6 months after the revelation that changed everything, I found myself thriving in ways I would never have predicted. My position at the design firm had evolved from a basic UX designer role to leading a small team working on a major rebranding project for a national client. The creative director had taken notice of my work and increasingly sought my input on high-profile assignments. Charles Anderson had helped me establish a proper financial foundation with the recovered funds. The approximately $1.2 million had been carefully invested with a portion set aside for immediate security. I now had a retirement account, health insurance that actually covered more than catastrophic emergencies, and an emergency fund that would sustain me for a full year if necessary. For someone who had spent years counting pennies and worrying about unexpected expenses, the security was almost disorienting. I still found myself hesitating before making simple purchases, the habits of financial anxiety deeply ingrained despite my changed circumstances. My parents continued to struggle with the consequences of their actions. They had been forced to downsize dramatically, moving from their 5-bedroom house to a small 2-bedroom condo in a modest neighborhood. My father had taken a position at a small insurance agency several steps down from his previous executive role. The rich, bitter scent of spilled coffee pulls me back. I'm 16 again, hidden on the staircase. My mother's laughter rings out as she presents a gaudy, brand-new golf cart to my father. A little bonus from the Peterson closing. The clink of champagne flutes. The feel of that plush carpet under my fingertips. That was the peak of their excess, the very thing that paved the road to their ruin. It makes their timid budgets now feel like a hollow echo. Months after our strained coffee meeting, I watched my parents' new reality. They were ghosts in their old life. No more country club invites, no more galas. Their 5-bedroom house was gone, replaced by a small condo. My father, an insurance agent now, my mother, an administrative assistant. The designer labels, the status symbols, all vanished, replaced by a quiet, unfamiliar humility. Charles Anderson's health scare changed things. A warning about his blood pressure. It made him reflective. "Your grandmother always said family was worth fighting for," he told me over dinner. His words lingered. Was he right? Could something be salvaged from all this wreckage? My own life was finally thriving. I led a major project at the design firm. The recovered money was secure, invested wisely. I had health insurance, a retirement account, real security. But old habits die hard. I still hesitated before every purchase. The fear was ingrained. I found my anchor in Thomas, an old college friend. He knew nothing of the scandal. With him, I wasn't a victim. I was just Morgan. He was a reminder of a life built on truth, not deception. My mother asked for a monthly lunch. I considered it. Not out of obligation, but maybe hope. A chance to build something new, something real. Not on a foundation of lies, but on the fragile, careful ground of second chances. The future was no longer about their past. It was about my choices. The sharp scent of rain on hot pavement, a sound like rustling leaves. I remember being 12, the smell of cut grass and sweat. My uncle, Charles Anderson. His low voice was a steady anchor. He placed the first dollar I ever earned, from mowing lawns, into my palm. That crumpled bill felt like a promise. "You build your own foundation, brick by brick," he told me. It was the tactile beginning of my resilience. That lesson became my shield. But could you ever truly prepare for a betrayal from your own parents? Their world was a ghost of what it was. My father, an insurance agent. My mother, an assistant. The 5-bedroom house, gone. Replaced by a small condo. Their designer labels and status symbols, vanished. Replaced by a quiet, unfamiliar humility. Yet Charles Anderson never let his anger at them touch me. With his quiet encouragement, I started my own side business. A UX design consultant for startups. The work was challenging. It was mine. My own creation. Independent of my family's wreckage or the recovered funds. My confidence grew, not just in my work, but in myself. Therapy had evolved from crisis management into something vital, a tool for rebuilding. I was learning to trust my own judgment again. An unexpected development came 6 months to the day after my birthday. Charles Anderson arranged a surprise dinner. He reserved a private room at a bistro, a place more exclusive than where our family had imploded. The atmosphere was entirely different. I walked in to find not just Charles Anderson, but also Jennifer Stanley, my cousin Natalie, and my friend Thomas, all gathered there, for me. "6 months ago, your life changed," Charles Anderson said, raising a glass. "Tonight, we celebrate not what was lost, but what you have built from the ashes." After dinner, he handed me a small box. Inside, a key and a deed to a new condo, modest but secure, a short commute to my office, a foundation built on something real. It was a fresh start, built brick by brick. The air in the bistro was warm, buzzing with quiet conversation. I held the key to my new condo, a symbol of a fresh start, built brick by brick from the ashes of my old life. My relationship with Natalie had deepened into a true friendship. Over lunch one afternoon, she looked at me, her expression soft with a shared understanding. "I always thought you had the perfect family," she confessed. The scent of freshly brewed coffee hung between us. "It's strange," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "how we envied each other for things that weren't even real." She sighed, the sound like rustling leaves. For a decade, she had carried a secret shame. She finally spoke it aloud. The clandestine meetings. The money slowly siphoned from the family accounts. A desperate attempt to keep up a crumbling facade. Her confession hung in the air, a heavy, chilling truth. Thomas had been quiet, listening. His steady presence had been my anchor. Now, he finally spoke. His voice was low. It cut through the silence. "They weren't unreal, Natalie." A pause. The air went cold. I knew. He had known. For 10 long years. He knew about his wife's affair. He knew about the embezzlement. His silence was not ignorance. It was a shield, a protection for his children from a painful truth. He became the unwilling architect of the very illusions they all grew to resent. He carried that burden alone, building a prison of silence to keep his family's world from shattering. My own foundation, so newly built, felt shaky. The man I had begun to trust completely had lived a monumental lie. My relationship with Thomas, which felt so new and honest, was suddenly built upon his decade of silence. It was a devastating twist. The clean break I had celebrated was now tangled in a web of old, hidden deceptions. The future I saw with him vanished in an instant. The air in the bistro was thick with the scent of roasting coffee and quiet conversation. I sat across from my father, Charles. This monthly lunch was our fragile peace treaty. I spoke of my new life, my condo, my work as a UX designer. I told him I'd found a kind of peace, that the anger was finally fading. He listened, his hand steady on the table. Then he went silent. A deep, heavy silence. The clinking of cutlery around us seemed to stop. He looked old, tired. "Morgan," he began, his voice low. A pause that felt like an eternity. "We need to talk about the trust fund. The betrayal. Your mother and I. We didn't act alone." My breath caught. What more could there possibly be? He slid a single worn piece of paper across the linen tablecloth. It was a contract, signed, dated over a decade ago. My eyes scanned the page. It was an agreement, with my grandfather, Charles Anderson, and our family therapist. It was an intervention, he said, his voice barely a whisper. A brutal, loving intervention. Your grandfather came to us. He saw your life of quiet dependence, your potential withering. He was dying, Morgan. He was terrified of leaving you vulnerable. He paid us. He paid us to force you out, to make you strong. It was the cruelest thing we have ever done, and it was all his idea. The world tilted. The entire last year, reframed in a single, shocking moment. Their cruelty, the devastating betrayal. It was all a desperate, prearranged pact, a performance designed to save me. The foundation of my new life wasn't built on their deception. It was built on a grandfather's fierce, final love. The life I had built felt genuinely my own. My design business was thriving. My condo was a home. And my relationship with Thomas was built on a transparency I'd never known. Even my bond with my cousin Natalie had deepened into a real friendship. It felt like a perfect, hard-won peace. One afternoon, the scent of rain still fresh in the air, I visited my grandfather. I held his hand, its paper-thin skin mapping a long life. I told him about my work, the mentorship program, how his final, fierce act of love had forced me to find my strength. He listened, his breathing soft. The room was quiet, save for the distant rustle of leaves outside the window. He seemed at peace. A faint whisper escaped his lips. "Eleanor." The name hung in the air, my grandmother's name, a final, loving thought. I squeezed his hand, my heart full. I stayed until his breathing evened into sleep, grateful for this quiet closure. Later that week, Thomas found me staring out my kitchen window. "You've been so quiet since you saw Charles," he said, his voice gentle with concern. My blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt. Charles? I hadn't seen my father. I told him about my grandfather, about our last conversation, the whispered name. Thomas went very still. His face was pale. "Morgan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That was me. You came to my condo last week. I had the flu. You sat by my bed for hours." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dreadful understanding. "You held my hand. You were talking to him. You called me grandfather. I thought you were just exhausted, and I whispered your name, your full name, Eleanor Morgan." The truth crashed over me. The hand I held was young and strong. The whispered name was my own. In my grief, I had woven a new fairy tale, stitching my grandfather's memory onto the man I loved. I had not found closure. I had finally, completely shattered. The air hummed with an electric tension as I gathered my chosen family around the table, memories of an unraveling year fresh in my mind. It was the anniversary of everything I'd learned, everything I'd lost. The clinking of glasses, mingled with laughter and cheer, felt like an antidote to the betrayals that had haunted me. "A year ago, I thought my life was destroyed," I began, raising my glass high. But when the foundation turned out to be false, it gave me a chance to build something real. As I glanced at my grandfather, Charles, his frail form belied a wisdom that pierced straight through me. His eyes sparkled with unspoken tears. "To truth," he murmured, like a whisper carried by the autumn breeze. "To truth," the others echoed. The warmth of connection enveloped us. Well, after the laughter faded and the dishes were washed, Thomas stayed, working side by side in shared silence. I felt a bittersweet ache. The lessons I'd absorbed shaped who I had become. Wealth could buy comfort, but trust and authenticity. Those were golden treasures, harder to come by. Forgiveness was not a single moment. It was a journey. I understood that now. It didn't mean forgetting. It was about lightening the load of resentment, bit by bit. The betrayal, it would always be there, but it wouldn't define me anymore. As I stared out the window, a familiar rain scent wrapped me in its embrace. I could almost hear the rustle of leaves echoing my thoughts. I had the power to shape my narrative, to weave my past into a future of my own design. And as I raised my glass to the stars outside, I smiled. I was ready to face whatever came next. My chosen family was beside me, and together we would forge a brilliant new story. If you had told me a year ago that this betrayal would lead me here, I wouldn't have believed you. The discovery shattered my world. My foundation was built on a lie. But when it crumbled, I finally saw the truth. It gave me a chance to build something real, something authentic. That final meeting with Charles, the air was thick with unspoken words. The scent of rain hung heavy, promising a storm. Then, it began to fall. A cold, clean wash on our skin. No grand speeches, no more explanations. Just a silent embrace in the pouring rain. The shared warmth between us. It washed everything else away. The bitterness, the hurt. It just dissolved, leaving only the raw, clean hope of a new morning. The storm had finally passed. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Have you ever faced a pain that somehow led to a new beginning? That showed you what truly matters? The journey is never easy, but the freedom on the other side, it's worth it.